All right, let's dive into this explainer and untangle something absolutely fascinating: the profound philosophical differences between ancient Eastern and Western concepts of political power. Have you ever stopped to wonder why some empires managed to survive for centuries, while others collapsed into totally bloody revolutions? Or how does ancient justifications for power are actually still shaping our world right now? Well, we're going to unpack exactly that. We're going to break this massive topic down into 5 quick parts. First, to save a dynasty. Then, defining the heavenly mandate. Third, divine right and contracts. Fourth, the fatal institutional flaws. And finally, modern performance legitimacy. Let's get right into it.
Part 1. To Save a Dynasty, featuring the Late Qing Regicide.
To truly grasp why these concepts matter, we've got to start in the shadows of the Late Qing Dynasty. Empress Dowager Cixi absolutely knew the empire had to adapt to survive foreign threats, but she firmly believed that rushing into reforms, like the ones being pushed by the young emperor or revolutionaries like Sun Yat-sen, without broad societal support, that was a recipe for total chaos. For her, survival wasn't just about having good ideas. It was quite literally all a question of timing. And that brings us to a seriously shocking historical moment. As Cixi was dying, she mapped out a regency transition to basically buy the empire 12 more years of stability. But there was a massive catch. The young emperor Guangxu was secretly planning to execute a very powerful military general, Yuan Shikai, the very second Cixi died. To stop this from triggering a catastrophic warlord rebellion, a loyal eunuch named Lacernel took matters into his hands. He literally poisoned the emperor with arsenic. It's wild, right? But it just goes to show that safeguarding a dynasty's mandate often required some extreme, bloody pragmatism. Moving to Part 2, defining the heavenly mandate and the origins of cosmic accountability. So how did this intense pressure to maintain order actually start? Well, it all rests on the foundation of Tianming, or the mandate of heaven. And here's the kicker. Unlike a permanent birthright, this was a highly conditional contract. The ruler, known as the Son of Heaven, was tasked with maintaining social harmony and acting as a moral steward for the people. His authority wasn't absolute at all. It depended entirely on his virtue. To put that into perspective, let's jump back to a pivotal year, 1046 BCE. This was the year the Zhao dynasty overthrew the Shang dynasty. And to justify taking the throne, the Zhao famously pointed to this exact concept. They claimed the previous rulers had simply become too corrupt, and because of that, they'd completely lost heaven's favor. You can actually see this play out in a brilliant 4-step cycle that defines so much of Chinese history. First, a new dynasty starts off strong, ruling with virtue. But eventually, subsequent rulers become corrupt. Then, natural disasters or famines hit, which people actively interpreted as cosmic displeasure. And finally, the mandate is violently transferred. So in this system, power is fundamentally tied to performance. If you fail to people, heaven literally withdraws its mandate. All right, Part 3, divine right and contracts. Let's look at Western concepts of legitimacy. Now, what's really crucial here is how this Eastern philosophy directly contrasts with the systems brewing across Europe around the same times. In the East, they demanded moral accountability. Rebellion was actually justified if the ruler was terrible. But the Western divine right of kings was a whole different ballgame. Power came straight from an unquestionable god, usually tracing lineage all the way back to Adam. That meant zero legal or moral right to rebel. If you rose up against the king, you were basically rebelling against God himself. When we look at these systems side by side, it's pretty eye-opening. And we even find a fascinating third path, the Flemish Blijde Inkomst, or joyous entry. Coming out of the medieval Low Countries, this was a literal, written legal contract between the ruler and the ruled. If the duke broke the rules, the cities actually had the legal right to just withdraw obedience. It's such an incredible historical contrast, right? You've got moral justification versus divine absolutism versus legal contractualism. Which brings us to Part 4, the fatal institutional flaws. Because what happens when legitimacy fails? Okay, so it all sounds great in theory, but philosophies on paper rarely survive contact with reality, do they? Both the Eastern and Western systems had some massive institutional flaws. The brilliant paradox of the Eastern system is what we'd call victor's justice. See, there was no objective way to measure the mandate. Winning a rebellion was literally the only proof you had it. This basically acted as ideological cover for violent, bloody coups. There was no peaceful transition, just cyclical warfare. Plus, blaming a dynasty's decline on fate often just discouraged leaders from pushing for real structural reforms. On the flip side, the Western system created this impenetrable shield for absolute tyranny. Since the monarch answered only to God, the subjects, well, they just had to suffer under horrific rulers. Trying to change the system, push for constitutional limits, or demand human rights was treated as religious heresy, which naturally led to massive societal stagnation. Just listen to this quote from King James I of England. It perfectly captures how rigid the Western view became. I mean, when a ruler literally calls themselves a god on earth, you can completely understand why it ultimately took massive, paradigm-shifting, and deeply violent revolutions, like the ones in France and America, to finally shatter this absolutist ideology. Finally, Part 5, Modern Performance Legitimacy and the Echoes of Ancient Philosophy. Bringing this thousands of years forward, we have to ask, does the mandate of heaven still exist today? Well, the emperors and the eunuchs might be long gone, but political scientists argue that those underlying expectations haven't disappeared at all. Actually, they've evolved into something incredibly relevant from modern geopolitics. If we look neutrally at the source material regarding modern China, experts point out that the current governance model heavily relies on something called performance legitimacy. The social contract with the public isn't based on divine right. It's based entirely on delivering tangible societal results. As long as the government provides economic growth and national stability, it essentially retains that implicit mandate from the public. We can actually see this playing out right now. Think about the execution of sweeping, systemic anti-corruption campaigns, or the pursuit of massive economic targets like the Two Centenaries goals. The current administration's actions deeply mirror that ancient requirement. The logic is exactly the same. Authority has to continuously justify itself through active, effective stewardship of the nation. If corruption or instability spikes, the mandate is threatened. Ultimately, the absolute biggest takeaway from studying these ancient philosophies is this. Whether a leader claims a mandate from the heavens, a legal contract from the cities, or a mandate from the modern masses, legitimacy is never, ever permanent. True power is always on borrowed time. So, it really forces us to ask, in our own modern societies, how do our leaders actually justify their right to rule? And exactly what happens when they fail to deliver? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the structures of power around you.